This video is brought to you by Honey. Hey Wisecrack, Michael here, ready to peer into the darkest abyss of all. Arguments about Star Wars. The Rise of Skywalker burst into theaters and perhaps unsurprisingly, left public opinion more split than Darth Maul. Like The Last Jedi before it, The Rise of Skywalker seems to be a love it or hate it kind of film. Regardless of which camp you fall into though, there are probably some choices in the movie that irk you. Maybe it was the new narrative reveals, or maybe it was the way the film handled or mishandled the choices of the previous installments. But what if all of these arguments miss the real point? What if the way to look at Star Wars is not as a series of good and bad choices designed to make us eternally rage, but as part of a long storytelling tradition? That is to say, what if we view Star Wars as an epic? And could dusting off some King Arthur manuscripts help us finally come to terms with the sequel trilogy as a whole? Let's find out in this Wisecrack edition on the Rise of Skywalker. And heads up, spoiler alert for pretty much all of Star Wars ahead. But before we get into that, I gotta give it up to Honey. Honey is the free browser extension that automatically applies discounts to save you money when you shop online. If there's one thing y'all don't know about me, it's how much I like sneakers. You can never see them for obvious reasons, but trust me when I say I have some really fun shoes. Anyways, this means I like to look online and see what's new from my favorite shoe retailers. When I finally do purchase a new pair, I use Honey to suggest discount codes so that I can save some cash. If Honey is unable to find a code, they usually offer me gold that I can apply towards gift cards to other stores online. It's a win-win. Honey can help you save on your favorite sites too. They support over 30,000 online stores, which include Target, Walmart, and even Domino's. There is no reason not to check it out. Honey has already saved Wisecrack subscribers over $27,000. It only takes 2 clicks to install, so there is no reason not to check it out. Go to joinhoney.com/wisecrack today to start saving. That's joinhoney.com/wisecrack. Now, back to the show. While the sequels were generally better received than the prequels, they've still attracted an array of criticisms. Fans and critics alike have been vocal about a lack of originality, an apparent disrespect to what came before, an overabundance of fan service, and a lack of character development for friends both old and new. This ongoing discourse has manifested in increasingly less impressive box office earnings for each installment of the series. With all that said, it'd be natural to have a somewhat pessimistic view for the future of the Star Wars franchise. With a warring fan base, a burned out audience, and sketchy corporate overlords, is Star Wars doomed? We're gonna go ahead and say, nah. And not just because we're reckless optimists. That's because the so-called problems that have and likely will continue to plague Star Wars aren't new at all. It could even be argued that our biggest complaints about Star Wars aren't flaws. In fact, they're firmly established aspects of epic storytelling. By epic, we not only mean the long narrative poems like Beowulf and the Odyssey, but the other non-poem stories that resemble them and have a knack for being retold over and over again. First, let's get the similarities between the Skywalker saga and historical epics out of the way. Star Wars has captured our collective attention for more than 40 years, and there's every reason to assume that it will continue to be passed down from generation to generation, much like the tales of old. The story and its characters are so thoroughly integrated into pop culture that everyone knows what Darth Vader sounds like when he breathes, or what a lightsaber is, even if you've never seen a Star Wars movie. It's kind of like how, even if you've never read Homer or Virgil, you know what an Achilles heel or Trojan horse is. But that's not the only way the Skywalker saga mirrors ancient epics. It borrows classic epic storytelling techniques as well. To understand how, let's look to scholars Barbara Graziosi and Johannes Halbold and their analysis of Homer's work. As you may know, Homer was the author long attributed to ancient Greek stories such as the Odyssey and the Iliad. We once thought that Homer was a single person, a one-man story machine churning out culture-defining works. But now scholars mostly believe that Homer was in fact a pseudonym for a group of storytellers who built upon, strengthened, and further developed each other's work. Graziosi and Halbold developed a theory of resonance to describe the way these disparate storytellers worked together. They argue that in order to maintain a consistent world and a single authorial voice, the various storytellers employed specific narrative features in each new tale. These techniques included starting a story mid-scene, or repeating specific phrases like high-hearted men and swift-footed Achilles, or using precise formulas to introduce characters or speeches. Even the precise way a hero undressed was ritualized and repeated from story to story. The use of resonance told the audience that this story was part of the Homeric tradition, and connected to past and future Homeric stories. stories. At the same time, it implicitly promised the audience a specific experience. Like the Odyssey, Star Wars is a saga helmed by various authors, namely George Lucas but worse,
I don't like sand,
J.J. Abrams and Rian Johnson. And like the Odyssey, Star Wars used resonance to remain coherent. This is instantly apparent the moment a Star Wars film begins, and the bright yellow text scrolls inexplicably through space while the iconic score plays. More examples of resonance are peppered throughout each film. These range from scene transitions, to character archetypes like the tragic hero, or the sage mentor, to visual homages that deliberately evoke earlier films in the series. First Lucas and now his successors deliberately used these resonances to establish Star Wars as a modern epic playing out right before our eyes. In fact, Abrams relies heavily on resonance in The Force Awakens, and even more so in The Rise of Skywalker. The Force Awakens hewed close to A New Hope. Both Luke and Rey are orphans from a desert planet. Both the Death Star and Starkiller Base are man-made planet destroyers, and both the Empire and the First Order are wannabe space fascists. Similarly, The Rise of Skywalker mirrors The Return of the Jedi. Both feature a young Jedi training with a dying mentor. Both begin with the rebels struggling after a crushing defeat, and both feature a Palpatine-concocted showdown between good and evil. Detractors might dismiss this as fan service or, at best, an over-reliance on nostalgia-driven narrative, but the way Abrams mirrors Lucas actually forges crucial thematic and structural links between the two trilogies. Abrams actually spoke to this during the promotion for The Force Awakens, stating, "We very consciously tried to borrow familiar beats so the rest of the movie could hang on something that we knew was Star Wars." Resonance also explains Abrams' strategic repetition of everything from central themes to incidental dialogue.
I got a bad feeling about this.
But it doesn't account for the second complaint lodged by Star Wars fans. Why so many inconsistencies? Well, for that, let's jump forward in time to medieval England and visit a very different epic. Arthurian legend, or Arthuriana, is what we call the total narrative surrounding King Arthur and his fabled Knights of the Round Table. Arthuriana is a particularly helpful epic for us because we can largely track its development across the centuries, and interestingly enough, it has a lot in common with the development and evolution of Star Wars. The first sustained depiction of the King Arthur legend appeared in the 12th century when Geoffrey of Monmouth penned The History of the Kings of Britain. For this, Jeff rounded up various fables and presented them as historical facts. The TLDR is, Arthur gets a throne and kingly title, marries Guinevere, fights a whole bunch of Saxons, and chats it up with a wizard named Merlin. Notice the glaring lack of magical swords, circular tables, heroic knights, and extramarital tryst. Not long after, a rogue poet added the Round Table to Arthur's story. In this way, the first Arthurian canon was essentially set. Think of this initial Arthurian canon, called the Matter of Britain, as Lucas-era Star Wars. Both were chiefly guided by one person who crafted a unified canon, though in Monmouth's case, he synthesized quite a bit of folksy miscellanea. Disney even referred to the Lucas-era movies as immovable objects when they acquired Lucasfilm. But obviously the Skywalker saga didn't end with Lucas, and Arthuriana was just getting started with Jeff. Over time, new storytellers added more and more to the Arthurian soup, their tales spreading organically and influencing one another. The more popular any new addition to the legend seemed, the more it was incorporated into subsequent tales. The best example of this was Chrétien de Troyes' introduction of the Holy Grail and the cuckolding Lancelot. In this way, a democratic process of storytelling crafted an updated Arthurian legend. Different authors had various reasons for their additions to the canon. Notably, de Troyes geared his work towards the taste of the French court, which fancied itself quite chivalrous. Thus, de Troyes' stories upheld good knightly virtues like courtly love. Authors like de Troyes and Thomas Malory memorialized the resulting canon in complete coherent manuscripts that were published widely. Again, this mirrors the evolution of the Star Wars canon and the way it's expanded. Though Lucas was historically hands-off with the Star Wars extended universe that sprang up after the original trilogy, he did start to incorporate some of these new elements into the prequels. For example, Aayla Secura, Coruscant, and Dooku's curved lightsaber hilt were all developed by different authors, but Lucas was a fan and, with permission, adopted them. And just like post-Jeff King Arthur storytellers, die-hard franchise geeks Abrams and Johnson creatively expanded the canon. Whereas de Troyes imbued Arthuriana with courtly love, Abrams and Johnson made contributions rooted in their individual philosophies about Star Wars. Of course, they have very different philosophies. Abrams is all about evoking that warm, fuzzy feeling that we all got when we watched our first Star Wars film. Johnson, on the other hand, seems more inclined to explore the complexities of both the characters and the universe. He wants to surprise us as much as that time Vader dropped the old paternity bomb on Luke.
No, I am your father.
It's ultimately an issue of heart versus head, and each interpretation is as valid or invalid as the other. But combine them into one trilogy, and you get a series of conflicting interpretations and clashing ideologies. You can even sense a sort of jostling for power from film to film. In particular, the last two films take previous plots and characters and either ignore, redirect, or straight up bisect them. Arguably, this worked to the detriment of the trilogy as a whole. With this in mind, let's take a look at where Arthuriana and Star Wars start to diverge, and what makes this whole thing tricky. Intellectual property laws. You know, those laws that let us buy and sell ideas. These didn't exist way back when. No one ever received a strongly worded cease and desist letter for writing a story about King Arthur and his magical sword. But today, Disney owns Star Wars, for better or worse. The franchise is their property, and that makes them the gatekeepers. That means they get to determine what stories do or don't earn a permanent place in the lore. Consequently, they can decanonize thousands of pages of stories with a simple press release. At first, they were pretty laissez-faire, allowing Abrams and Johnson, respectively, to make The Force Awakens and The Last Jedi on their terms. The subsequent backlash compelled Disney to tighten their grip in Episode 9. That led to some serious backpedaling on previously introduced story elements, and some arguably overzealous course correcting. Now, this would be totally chill if we were going by medieval standards of storytelling, but thankfully knights in smelly armor are no longer a thing, and these days, our society is completely saturated with media. As a result, we are a pretty savvy audience with more sophisticated standards when it comes to world building and storytelling. Hell, if we weren't, then this channel probably wouldn't even be a thing. Sure, multiple interpretations could peacefully coexist in Arthuriana, but in Star Wars, the conflicts within the canon and the scenes of rebuttal create a storytelling discord that is glaringly apparent to the audience. That discord is compounded by the fact that we're all consuming the exact same version of Star Wars, instead of, hitting up our favorite local bard for a new, possibly inconsistent retelling. In the age of mass media, we're not as willing to forgive inconsistencies as the great Homeric fandom was. So, while Star Wars suffers from the same repetitions and inconsistencies of your classic epic, it does so in an extremely media-conscious society, where every decision is held up to a Reddit thread microscope. Viewed in this light, is it really all that surprising that The Rise of Skywalker hasn't pleased everyone? Star Wars is positioned as a modern myth and uses the same storytelling techniques, and yet it's judged by a completely different, more exacting standard than classic epics, myths, and legends ever were. What's more, contemporary storytelling idioms mean that Disney has to maintain a strict, controlled canon for a franchise that seems destined to defy the concept. The Rise of Skywalker and J.J. Abrams worked within the confines of expectation and epic structure and attempts to conclude a saga over 40 years in the making across 9 movies while also trying to satisfy a passionate and outspoken fanbase. Let's see Chrétien de Troyes give that a try. But what do you guys think? Do you want Star Wars to stay faithful to Lucas's original vision? Or is it more exciting when new authors interject new ideas into the mythos? Let us know what you think in the comments. As always, a huge thanks to our patrons for making our channel and podcast possible. Hit that subscribe button, and as always, thanks for watching. Later.